Here comes Batman!
And this time, he's a girl. Yes, it's the all-new Batgirl show.
When one thinks of canceled Batgirl projects, some people's minds may jump to the very highly publicized cancellation of the live-action Batgirl project. This from 2022, when the Batgirl film starring Leslie Grace in the title role was canceled. A film said by some behind the scenes at Warner Brothers to be unreleasable, and ultimately it was written off for taxes. While not the first project to be shelved so far into development, it is rare for it to be so public and for so many people to know about it. It's not common, but it happens. Now, while all of the aforementioned fills me with a morbid curiosity to see this unreleasable film, to be frank, it makes me more excited about that Batgirl film than the announcement of it in the first place. Just what happened in it? I want to know. However, this was not the first Batgirl project to fail to get off the ground. Years prior, there had been the non-starter that was the animated version of Batgirl Year One. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we're going to take a look back at a time when a Batgirl origin movie just didn't work out. But first, just what was Batgirl Year One? Because this movie would have been a direct adaptation of a graphic novel, or rather a miniseries. The film would have been based on the aforementioned mini of the same name. Spanning 9 issues and released through 2003, the series served as a new post-Crisis on Infinite Earths origin for Barbara Gordon's Batgirl. Written by Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon, with art by Marcos Martin, inks by Alvaro Lopez, and colors by Javier Rodriguez, the series would dive deep into exploring just how this iteration of Barbara joined the Batfamily, and also rework some of the villains who were present at her origin, and add some too. The general story given was that Barbara Gordon was a young woman chomping at the bit, who was tired of everybody underestimating her, thinking that she was just some little girl, which was accentuated by her short stature. In defiance of her father, who doesn't want her to be a police officer, she ends up making a Batgirl costume and attending a masquerade police ball, where she jumps headlong into a life as Batgirl. This when she takes on a would-be robber at the masquerade event, Killer Moth. She seeks and doesn't receive mentorship from Black Canary, puts her training as a fighter and in computer science to the test, and eventually comes into the fold working alongside Batman and Robin, and seemingly manages to keep her secret from her father, Commissioner Gordon. Maybe. There's also some Robin-Batgirl romance sprinkled in there, and that's the extreme cliff notes. The series was a sequel to Robin Year One, and while it was setting out to add and change around some details, there were many nods to Barbara's first appearance in comics back in Detective Comics 359 in 1967. She had been a joint synergy creation between Julius Schwartz, the editor at DC Comics, and William Dozier, a television producer, so they could use the character in Batman the TV series from the 60s.
I don't know who you are, young lady, but you certainly know how to handle yourself well.
Holy agility, I'll say.
Thank you, dynamic duo. I'm sure you could have handled these crooks without my help, but I was glad for the chance to join in the fun.
So in a way, she was developed for TV. And this also worked for Schwartz, because this way he could introduce a new female Bat character into the Bat family, as years prior he had gotten rid of Batwoman and the first Batgirl because he felt they were too silly. We have a whole video on that from a while back, and I'll link it down below. In that comic, Barbara was a grown woman, a thrill seeker who was a college graduate and a librarian and a trained martial artist. She dressed up as Batman to go to a masquerade ball because she was an admirer of the Dark Knight. But in this version, she never got to the ball. Instead, she bumped into Killer Moth and his gang attempting to kidnap Bruce Wayne, and it went from there. Lots of things are referenced between the two origins. It would actually be interesting to compare and contrast the two. They also do a lot of work with Killer Moth and his original origins, how he wanted to be a kind of Batman for the criminal underground. They even bring up the Killer Moth signal and all of those things, the Mothmobile. On the Barbara front, you have things like her not entering into the fold right away, that desire to set out on her own, but there's a bit more depth given to it in 2003 series because there's more space, and also they're playing it from a slightly different angle because she's younger and coming into her own more. It really hits the not just a girl bit a bit hard, but all of it is in service for the overall theme that the work is going for. So it makes sense thematically, even if at times, sometimes it pushes it a bit. But they also drop pushing it as hard by around issue 4. Still, little personal nitpicks aside, Barbara comes across as very nuanced in this. She's determined, really driven and passionate. She makes mistakes, grows, and has to do some really deep soul searching to find out why does she really want to be Batgirl, all while keeping that original thrill-seeking element, plus inserting some dark foreshadowing for her eventual future as Oracle, and grounding a lot of that computer skill set she had there as pre-existing. It's a solid mini that has a lot of love for the Batgirl character inside of it. There's a respect and love of her history there. There's even a reference to how back in the Bronze Age she was a congresswoman for a bit. So few people even remember that that happened. It was generally well received, both on a story front and on art front. And some of the changes that it made would be cemented going forward. All of this is to say it was a very solid origin story, and that could make it an appealing prospect for adaptation. Something neatly self-contained featuring a well enough known character with some strong supports of some very popular characters, and a distinct tone and look. And there were a couple of people who really wanted to adapt it. One person who was very passionate about it was Lauren Montgomery. When it comes to the DCAU, Montgomery began her career as a storyboard artist for the JLU, the Justice League Unlimited. Eventually, she ended up being involved in many direct-to-DVD projects and directing several for DC projects under the Warner Animation division. The late 2000s was an interesting time for direct-to-consumer features. The DCAU, the DC Animated Universe, had drawn to a close, and so now the movies were casting about, trying to find a new direction. So you saw a lot of new things. You would see direct adaptations like Justice League New Frontier, anthology films like Batman Gotham Knight, and a couple of films that were origins, Wonder Woman and Green Lantern First Flight. Montgomery details how she pitched the idea of this Batgirl Year One movie in 2008. She stated, "Oh boy, this is an old one." She's talking about her concept art. "08. 2 years ago, I tried to convince DC and Warner Home Video to let me direct this as one of the direct-to-DVD line of DC movies. It's my most favorite graphic novel ever. I love it to death." Needless to say, they were not interested in anything that did not have Superman or Batman in the leading role. It went nowhere. This is an interesting statement because you can see that pivot, because after you have those origin movies, things very much move from 2009 onward in a Batman and Superman direction, because the next projects you have are Superman, Batman, Public Enemies, Justice League, Crisis on Two Earths, Batman Under the Red Hood, Superman/Batman Apocalypse. So it's a very Batman and Superman heavy time, not taking a lot of risks that people are gonna check out some different things. Bruce Timm, also of DCAU fame, also wanted to adapt this comic, but he stated a slightly different but adjacent and connected reason to why this project fell through. He stated, "We were developing and hoping to get started on a Batgirl film based on Year One, but because of Wonder Woman's slow sales start, that won't be happening now. We'd originally planned to do sequels for Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, but Wonder Woman's sales started out extremely slow, and then over time we're eventually able to catch up to probably Justice League Frontier. The execs decided because it wasn't able to sell quickly right away, whereas Justice League was, that there wouldn't be any more female superhero films right now." So you can see you put those two quotes together, they're part of the same rationale. I'm curious as to your thoughts though. Do you think that in 2008 more people would have gone for Batgirl than they would have for Wonder Woman? Share your thoughts. Now, Batgirl Year One would be adapted as a motion comic in 2009. Motion comics occupy an interesting space in the adaptation landscape. What do you think of them? Do you view them as full-fledged adaptations or something else? Now, this Batgirl Year One version of Batgirl will get a sequence in the finale of the animated series Batman the Brave and the Bold in 2011, in the episode Mightfall. This is the episode where Batmite is bored with Batman the Brave and the Bold, and he wants to get the series canceled so that it can go into a darker direction. He then sees different versions of shows that could be. One is Batgirl, featuring the costume from Year One and seeing her battling Firefly.
But I want the moody loner Batman.
And this time she's brought a friend.
Firefly went pretty hard in that miniseries, actually. It was a good level of subtle creepy. Timm did hint in 2011 that he would still like to do something with the project. This one asked about continuing the animated Year One line as Batman Year One was coming out that year. He stated, "I suppose we could sneak it in there. I'd love to do it personally." Timm has some interesting ideas about where Batgirl should go, and you do see that when they do eventually adapt The Killing Joke and they add an entire storyline that is loosely based on an issue from the past, but then they pump it up with all kinds of Batgirl Batman action.
No!
Bruce Timm, stop. Not many people want it. I won't say nobody, because there's always people who come out and they're like, yes, OTP. So when it comes to Barbara Gordon's Batgirl, she does and has appeared in many adaptations, but it's usually in a group setting. Now, 2011 would see the launch of the New 52, the DC line-wide reboot that would just restart their universe. And Babs, who had been Oracle for years at that point, would be placed back into the role of Batgirl, at first under the hands of Gail Simone, and then the character would then go through a few tonal shifts, such as the Batgirl from Burnside era approaching Rebirth, where she was put more back into a hip, young college university girl kind of headspace that was meant to be topical for the time, lots of selfies in clubs, and social issues. And eventually she would end up back in an Oracle position, but she could still be Batgirl as well. Do you think Batgirl has the name power, the brand recognition to stand on her own, to be out there in her own animated projects or live action ones, and that people would come? The general public, not just us nerds. Gosh, I want to see that canceled Batgirl so badly. I want to see if it really is such a hot mess. I've seen some bad movies, nigh unwatchable movies. I want to see where it ranks in in comparison, or if it really even is that bad. It could still come out years later. That happens sometimes. I'll be keeping an eye out. Would you have liked to see an animated adaptation of Batgirl Year One? Are there other Batgirl stories you'd be more interested in seeing adapted? What is your dream Batgirl project? And it doesn't have to be with Babs. Share your thoughts down below. I want to hear them. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time of your day spent discussing comics and comic adjacent things with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.